Everyone, happy Friday. And oh, my alarm's gone off, reminding me to come on the stream. I'd already remembered. So I'm just going to double check that I'm not silenced. I'm not silenced. Everything is well in the world. Actually, no, everything's terrible in the world, but never mind. So begin with, we're going to talk about the British Medical Association, who have voted in favour of a strike later this month. And initially, we've straight away got a discussion on semantics. So junior doctors, we're talking about junior doctors. Technically, they are now known as resident doctors as of last year. There's a bit of a discussion about what to call them. It's really this simple. I keep saying the purpose of communication is to be understood. If I say junior doctor, 100% of people know what I'm talking about. If I say resident doctor, the only people who know what I'm talking about are the people who've been keeping up with the very latest news. So junior doctors it is. Now, in terms of, until the public are more used to the idea of them being called resident doctors, because if I were to say resident doctors to people, most people do not know what I'm talking. They'll think, what, doctors who live with the patients? There's not many of them, surely. So what they're asking for, just to explain it from their point of view first, before I completely tear it down, because I think this is absolutely ridiculous, strategically as well as morally. But they want their pay restored to 2008 levels. Now, just to take you back to why is 2008 this gold standard? And this is the first reason why I think junior doctors, in fact, do you know what, if we want to compromise, we need to call them junior doctors or resident doctors. We could just call them boneheads if you like. This is the reason why, first reason why they're boneheads. The reason why 2008 is a gold standard is because that was after 10 years of Labour budgets, which had put public sector pay, including that of NHS doctors, in a fairly decent place. I mean, I was a teacher at the time. I can tell you, I started teaching when Labour had just come into power. And let me tell you, teachers' wages went up pretty smartly indeed. Yes, the Labour government then had a much more functional economy than the one does now, but nonetheless, that economy was functional under the Tories, and yet they didn't feel the need to pay public sector workers properly. So the reason 2008 is a gold standard is because it came after 10 years of Labour budgets. And then it fell away really quite badly. And it fell away very badly for junior doctors because whenever the Tories made the minimum, the absolute minimum pay awards in order to keep some sort of NHS going, but they really wanted it to collapse. So junior doctors were the, or boneheads we could say, were the most screwed of all of them. So because they had the least choice in where they could work, and also they were on relatively decent pay, as in if you're on any sort of doctor's salary until very recently, you can afford the cost of living. So the first thing I would point out is by charting a course of action which makes it someone saying junior doctor pay is still far below inflation. No, it's not. It's absolutely not. It's below the equivalent 2008 levels, but it isn't. I mean, how can you say 28% is over 3 years is below inflation? That is, inflation at the moment is about two and a bit percent, 2.5%. Or no, sorry, it's about 3.2% right now. But it's been sort of between 2.5% and 3% over the last couple of years, or the last year or so. But so they've been getting significantly above. Now, I will just say, like, obviously what they're doing is legal. If they want to strike, they can strike, right? I mean, I have said for many years, because obviously strikes became a big issue from 2023, and I consistently said, for me, a strike, you know, for me to support a strike, because I've been a teacher, you know, I've been asked to vote on strikes. For me to support a strike, first of all, it has to be the last resort after negotiations have failed, which is not the case here. I will point out the BMA have openly said they refuse to negotiate. So this isn't coming at the end of negotiations because they've said they refuse to negotiate. But also, for me, it has to be one of three things. First of all, real terms pay cuts. Well, they're not getting real terms pay cuts. They had a massive uplift last year, which was actually backdated to 2023. The second one would be worse working conditions, because that's important. Well, their working conditions aren't being worsened. And the third one would be threat to jobs. None of those apply here, but those are my rules, right? Those are my own feelings of when strike is and is not appropriate. But I will also note, so they want to go back to this 2008. So since 2008, obviously the rate of pay has been going down. That's what that means. And that is true in real terms. So the question I would ask, so they first went on strike in, was it 2023? It was no earlier than 2023. There were various strikes that started in 2023. I'm trying to remember whether the BMA began theirs towards the end of 2023 or early 2024. I think it was 2023. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what I would say is they waited 15 years before they made a fuss. Now, after the banking crisis, you could understand a bit of patience. That's fair enough. You also have to consider the state of the economy. The banking crisis, I mean, Labour, to be fair, continued to put money into the NHS, but inevitably pay awards were a bit less than you would like. But you give it a few years, and that would have included the first few years of the Tory government. But after those first few years of the Tory government, the economy did start to get better. The economy improved before Brexit wrecked it again. But there were several years of actually a growing economy, right? And growing pay awards in the private sector, not so much the public sector, but the private sector. So why didn't the BMA make a big issue of it then? I seem to remember they did make an issue over working conditions about 10 years ago, but not pay. So again, they've waited 15 years before deciding enough's enough. And I'll put another thing here as well. Phil, they're saying threat to jobs as well as PAs to replace them. No, they're not. That's completely untrue there. Labour instantly jumped down on that. I agree that the way the Tories were allowing physician associates to work was potentially a threat, but I'll point two things out. First of all, it wasn't a threat to their jobs, because even by the Tories' reckoning, the NHS was desperately short of doctors. No doctors are being getting rid of because of PAs. But secondly, one of the first things Streeting did, in terms of good things, because it was a mixed bag, shall we say, Wes Streeting, was to order a review into physician associates. And you know, that is sort of concluding that there is there needs to be more rigid determination of what they are and are not qualified to do. So no, that's utterly untrue. It was actually untrue under the Tories, because even the Tories recognised they needed more doctors. So no doctors' jobs were threatened. But that's physician associates. The Labour are getting rid of that blurring of the lines between what they are. And specifically, Labour are changing it so that it has to be made explicitly clear when a patient is dealing with a physician associate that they know they're not a doctor. So no, that issue is actually being dealt with. But the other thing, just think about it from a practical point of view. So first of all, they claim that the NHS easily has the money. No, it doesn't. If you look at Labour's plans for the NHS, a lot of people are already looking at it and going, ooh, the funding's going to be a bit tight here. Are you sure you're going to be able to do this? So the idea that the NHS is swimming in money just because it got an uplift is ridiculous, because that uplift is needed for the community centres, which are needed to ease pressure on hospitals. And even then, staffing is going to be an issue. Second issue is immediately if you give, because remember they've already had a roughly 28%, I forget, it's 27 to 28% pay increase from Labour. So they've given, and that was over, I think that's over a 3-year period. It backdated 2023, and it also includes this next year. So it's 3 years worth, about 28. So it's roughly an 8 to 9% annual pay increase. And they're asking for another 29% basically overnight, right? So if you do that, see it straight away, everyone else, every other public sector worker will go, well, hang on a minute, we want to go back to 2008 levels as well. Literally everyone would. Teachers, nurses, paramedics, every public sector worker would go, hang on a minute, all of our pay is lower than in 2008. We want that back again. That would completely destroy the budgets. So all of a sudden, from a practical point of view, if the government, it's doing the thing again. If the government agreed to do that, straight away, their money for investment's gone. And then what happens? You know, these NHS staff get some better pay, be much better pay for the next few years. Then what? Tory stroke reform government back in. What do you think happens then? They won't have to worry about pay awards then, will they? Because there'll be no NHS left. And I'll tell you something. If anyone watched PMQs this Wednesday, Badenoch mentioned this. And do you know what she said? It won't be a surprise. You could probably guess if you never saw it. Badenoch attacked Starmer by saying that they gave junior doctors, whatever it was, 27, 28% pay award, and they're still striking. So you know immediately what would happen. So at some point, the Tory stroke reform are coming back into government. It doesn't matter if it's the next election, the election after. At some point, they're coming back. But of course, this action makes it more likely it's the next election. And then straight away, what will happen? I'll tell you what will happen. The next time there's any the pay will be squeezed, first of all, because the Tories will go, hang on a minute, you're being too generous to there. They'll squeeze it because they want the NHS to collapse. You know, there's no point in making arguments to them, but you need to offer competitive rates of pay to recruit. They don't want to recruit. The Tories were making it more difficult to recruit NHS doctors. They had shortages, but they were blocking newly qualified doctors from taking up posts, for example. That was under Sajid Javid. That was several years ago. And then they'll say, whenever the BMA go, hang on, we want to discuss pay awards, they will come back to them and say, do you remember when you had a 28% pay award and then you wanted the same again and you went on strike? No, we're not going to talk to you. What's the point of talking to you? Because you're never happy with anything. That is immediately what would happen. Oh, Phil's saying their PAs are not medically qualified. Untrue, they are medically qualified. That's untrue. Phil, please research these things properly. PAs are medically trained. They're not doctors. They're not trained to the same level as a doctor. They are medically trained. And they are not paid more than doctors. Lunacy to expect instantaneous return to 2008 wages unless other sectors are picking up too. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there is what it is, it's like saying that you can ride out 14 years of a Tory government and then expect a Labour government just to change everything back overnight. This is one of the problems Labour have at the moment, that they've inherited a public that's incredibly impatient. Now, I understand the impatience because the public have been lied to for too many years. They've been lied to by the Tories that things were going to get better. Austerity was going to put everything right again, and it didn't. It made it worse. Brexit was going to be the thing that unlocks everything. Didn't, made it worse. So Labour come in and Labour start talking about, oh, we're setting the foundations for the future. So obviously the public are going, we've heard this before, mate, we're not buying it. So I get the impatience, but nonetheless, it is a level of impatience that Labour are having to contend with. You know, but people need to understand. I have the pay issue wrong. I absolutely do not have the pay issue wrong. But people have to accept, people need to know that when you let the Tories run the country, public services are going to suffer. And part of that suffering is public sector pay suffering. And you cannot expect Labour to come in and turn around 14 years of failure overnight. Absolutely ridiculous. But news just in, Unite have suspended Angela Rayner. What? Are you kidding me? Oh, Unite are funny bunnies, aren't they? Are you kidding? Hold on. Where are you getting this from? I want to check all the headlines. Is this a troll? Is it April the 1st? You are actually kidding me. I'm not seeing it on any bulletins. Go on, even if it's some troll. Oh, no, you're right. It's on the BBC. Over the bin strikes in Birmingham. See, that's another one where actually, now, I will say with the Birmingham bin workers, I have sympathy for them because they have been screwed over. But actually, I am seeing it on the BBC. As we're talking about like unions and striking, why not? So it's worth just going over the context of the bin strikes in Birmingham because they have been screwed over as well, partly by the council, partly by their own union, I'm going to say. So let me just point out here what happened with the Birmingham bin strikes issue. So a few years ago, Birmingham came to some dodgy agreement with, this sometimes happens, they came to a bodged pay deal whereby they created an entirely new job for, like, I suppose, experienced refuse collectors. And it was a made-up job. It was like some of them would get this senior position, which included more money, so that was the pay award. So instead of just giving them an across-the-board pay award, they gave it to these particular people. And in theory, they had extra responsibilities. They were issued with a tablet and they were supposed to note down things on their rounds. They didn't because it was a made-up job, right? It's busy work. And they dropped it after a couple of weeks, I gather. But it ran into legal trouble because it's sexist. Because it has to be pointed out, the vast majority of refuse collectors are men. Not absolutely all, but the vast majority are men. Whereas there was no equivalent award for, say, teaching assistants, where the vast majority are women, or something like that, right? So it was ruled to be contrary to, basically it widened the gender pay gap within that council. So it was gender discrimination, basically. So the situation was that Birmingham Council found itself, and it's probably different councillors, I mean, they have sort of changed hands, but still, Birmingham Council's found itself in this position last year, I think it was, of it can't have that pay award in place if it's not going to do it for other workers, because it's basically, it might not have been intended that way, but it is basically a sexist policy which widens the gender pay gap. And there's supposed to be a legal duty to close the gender pay gap, if anything. But at the same time, obviously, they don't have the funds to just then roll out the same sort of deal for other council workers or public workers paid for by the council, local authorities. So it is a mess. I absolutely agree it's a mess. But I'm also going to say that Unite, in this case, they should never have accepted that pay deal. That was a bullshit pay award. It's ultimately the council's fault in a sense, but the union should accept responsibility here. What do they expect the government to do? And this leads back, this is a similar situation to the junior doctor strike as well, the BMA strike. You know, Unite will just say, well, the government should just give them more money to roll it out across everyone else. That'd be brilliant. Where's the money coming from? Where's the money coming from? And then every other council will want it as well. Where's the money coming from? Oh, just tax the rich, tax the rich. Yeah, simple solutions. So this is something. Do you know what? Unite are a shit union, aren't they? I do have to say I have a lot of respect for Sharon Graham. I do understand that a lot of what she does, she is actually fixing the union. I've got a lot of time for her. And some of her nonsense, I understand it's because Unite is basically, it's where failed left-wing extremists go, basically. If they can't make it in politics, they join Unite. So Unite is a hotbed of like populist, left-wing populism, basically. So you have to play the game to a certain extent. But Rayner, so why is Rayner being kicked for this? Because she is the minister. Well, first of all, she's a member of Unite. Not every Labour minister will be a member of Unite. They're probably all members of a union. But secondly, because she is I suppose, she is the cabinet minister for communities, so local government. So she is the cabinet minister who deals with local government issues. So I guess that is it. Um, Utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. But the Birmingham situation is incredibly messy. You know, I have sympathy for the workers because, you know, you're basically asking a load of workers who accepted a pay award that their union should never have agreed to because it was a dodgy deal. It was clearly a dodgy arrangement. They knew it was a bogus arrangement. They knew that these jobs weren't actually being created. It was bullshit jobs. It was being paid thousands of pounds extra for doing nothing extra. And it wasn't even across the board. It's not like they just gave an uplift to refuse collectors. It was just specific ones. Massively dodgy. Gareth, they're saying you have to be in a union to be a Labour MP. Sort of. Realistically, you generally do, yeah. Doesn't have to be Unite, though. But, yeah, I think this is really... Unite. I mean, I always say join a union. If Unite is the union to join, I would still say join it because you do not want to ever have, you know... And Sharon Graham has shifted the focus back onto, like, protecting workers' rights. But this is one where... I mean, what would you do, realistically? You can't just say, well, give us more money then. Because it's like, no, live within your means. And, again, you cannot... Like, if the Tories had not been in power for 14 years, councils would not be in the mess they're in. You know, Labour were funding councils perfectly well before. I'm not saying they were flush with money, but they were being paid properly. They were getting money. And the Tories removed most of... They removed half of all central government grants to councils in terms of value. And, again, there's a cost. There's a cost to letting the Tories run the country. But, you know, this is a messy one. The BMA one is not a messy one. The BMA, I think, is, in my view, is cut and dry. They've had a big uplift. Yes, it's not back to 2008 levels. No one's back to 2008 levels, right? No public sector worker is. But they did get a big uplift because they were the most screwed, right? And it's going up above inflation. So they will find themselves doing much better under Labour than the Tories, and yet they're embarking on, you know, a case of... And actually, most junior doctors won't even remember 2008 levels of pay anyway, because most doctors who were junior doctors at the time may well be registrars or consultants by now. So, or GPs. But the Birmingham one is actually genuinely messy, and I actually don't know what the solution is. You know, it's not fair to ask people, because, you know, it's not like this pay award was last year, now it's been cancelled. It was like years ago. So they've been used to managing on a certain wage, right? You can't just take thousands of pounds off someone on not a great... I mean, it's not a terrible income, a council worker, even a refuse collector, but it's not... You're not flush. I suppose it depends where you are. I suppose in the north of England, it's not so bad. But in the southeast of England, forget it, you know. And you've got... But then from the government's point of view, they can't just hand over more money. From the council's point of view, the move was illegal. They have to rectify it. They have to remedy the situation. They can't ignore the courts. So it's like, what do you do? What do you do? I don't know. I actually don't know what you do. But there we go. Phil, they're saying the BMA versus GMC court judgment, the judge concluded that PAs were not medically qualified. No, they're not doctors, but they are medically qualified. They are trained in, like a nurse is medically qualified. You're using the term medically qualified to mean a doctor. We know they're not doctors. We know they're not allowed to diagnose, right? But they are medically trained in the sense that we understand a nurse is medically trained, a paramedic isn't medically trained. You know, they are medically trained in that sense. Wanting to peg in there, so they're kicking out their biggest voice inside government. Sounds very clever. Unite are, honestly, of all the unions, of the big unions, should we say, there are some other funny unions, I guess. But of all the big unions, the problem is, it's like, you know, when you talk about student politics, I don't like the term myself because it's quite insulting. because plenty of students are, you know, perfectly capable of conducting a serious political debate. So I don't like the term myself. I think it's, you know, pejorative. But the term basically means when, because the idea is when you're young and you have political discussions, because you're not necessarily that experienced. Some might be. I mean, I was interested in politics from the age of 8. So by the time I was a student at 18, I had 10 years experience reading about politics. But nonetheless, a lot of people first come into political discussions at university. They've never thought about it before. And you lack a lot of context, right? So your arguments can be fairly simplistic, get a lot of things wrong, usual thing. You know. So student politics tends to mean when you either argue about things you cannot change. So, for example, Graham Hughes, who does, you know, politics social, he's thinking of changing the name again. So I'll be doing his stream again at 1 o'clock today on his channel. So he ran for student union when he was at the same university as me, and he ran for student union, and he was talking about like local bus services and stuff like this with his pitch, right? Whereas he was up against someone who was talking about, would you believe it, Gaza, right? And they won. The Gaza candidate won. And that's what they mean. So you're arguing against first of all, something that you have no influence over. If you elect this person, they're not going to do the things they say because they have no power to, and also tends to come up with simplistic arguments. And that's what unites. It's not what they're like. As I say, they have much improved under Sharon Graham. I will give her credit for the fact she has tried to turn the union into a serious union again. The problem is there's too many influential people in it who want the student politics, if you call it that. But there we go. You say that there isn't any scope set for PAs. There is going to be. That is exactly what Labour are doing right now. But anyway. National changeover for junior doctors happening in August. Summer is the busiest time of the year. It's just cynical. I mean, there is a sense in which all strikes can and are sensibly cynical. At the end of the day, what is the purpose for you withdrawing your labour? It is to make it more expensive for your employer to allow you to strike than to settle with you. Except in this particular case, their settlement is like ridiculous. So yeah, but the point is, if the purpose is to, because that's the way it works, like, you know, an employer looks at the situation and which is the least amount of money to give out, because if you're going to lose money in terms of lost productivity, I mean, not in this case, the NHS doesn't make a profit, but in general terms. But actually, although that is a point to make, that is why and I said this back in 2023 and last year as well, it's why unions should make sure they don't try and copy private sector strike strategies in the public sector, because it's a fundamentally different beast. In the private sector, you're talking about profit-making employers. So the calculation is really simple. You threaten to cost your employer more money by going on strike than it will cost them to settle with you. That's the basis of it. It doesn't work in the public sector because you're not making money. In the public sector, what you need to do is to threaten public support for the government, which will work if the public are on your side, which will be why it will be interesting to see whose side will the public be on here, because I'm going to struggle to believe that the public, after seeing junior doctors get a 28% pay rise over 3 years, I'll just emphasise, I'm not sure they're going to really think that it's fair to demand another 29% overnight when other public sector work, just to get back to 2008 levels, when other public sector workers are not at 2008 levels or anywhere near in many cases. John, they say, I joined Unison while working in care, did my damnedest to encourage colleagues to sign up. Unison were on the ball, taking on LA local authorities, that would be. not Los Angeles, dodgy contracts in our area and terms and conditions for carers. I mean, most of the unions, even Unite, I mean, they're effective. I would still say if the main union in your workplace is Unite, join Unite, right? But, you know, they're funny bunnies. They're just, they're not the most serious of people sometimes. But anyway. Phil going on about the PAs again. They're working beyond scope and diagnosis. Yeah, that's why Labour are tackling it. Exactly, it was a Wild West. They came in straight away and held a review, and they've already reported on some of the things they've found and are going to be changing. Like, you're worrying about things that are already in hand. If in a couple of years' time there's still no progress, then by all means complain again. But at the end of the day, it is already improving. You're going by information you've picked up like a year ago. Vince there saying a strike should be at a time that has maximum effect. Yeah, sorry, I was going off on a tangent, wasn't I? Yes, exactly. If you are going to strike, then obviously it makes sense to strike at maximum impact. So I wouldn't describe, well, it's true to say that if you're going to do it, when it's going to damage the NHS the most, that's cynical. Yes, okay, you can call it cynical, but that is also strategic. That's what you would do. You wouldn't, you don't go on strike like, it's a bit, if you went on strike at a quiet time, it's a bit like going on a diet between meals. It doesn't quite work, does it? But there we go. Dad as a railway worker has been in the RMT union for decades. I mean, always be in a union. The workers, even under the Tories, would have a much happier time if everyone was in a union. What I would say is this. Teachers, for example, teachers were screwed under the Tories as well. Don't get me wrong. It's not proof against it. You still don't want a Tory government. There's still a cost. But teachers rode the storm better than some. And teachers, almost 100% of teachers are in a union. Now, the reason why teachers are mostly in a union is not because of pay representation. It's because of insurance. Because as a teacher, you can be accused of things, because you know what kids are like. Kids don't always think responsibly. And a kid can accuse you of something. So it's basically like legal insurance in case you end up in serious trouble based on an accusation. So that's why teachers are in a union. But it also works to make sure that you get we get a very good deal on pensions. My teacher's pension scheme, which only has 11 years paid into it, is worth more than my wife's private workplace pension after she'll have worked her whole life there. Her whole adult life there. They didn't throw her in there as a child. But, by the time she retires, she will have worked almost her entire working life at the one employer, or the vast majority of it anyway. And her works pension from that, which will have 3 or 4 times as many years contributions as mine, will not be worth as much. So the teacher's pension scheme is a pretty good deal. And they're pretty good on pay negotiations as well. Even then, sometimes I think teachers' unions strike a bit too quickly sometimes. But at the same time, there is a benefit in having basically 98% of your workforce unionised. But there we go. Anyway, we've sort of run out of time there. Last one on the Birmingham thing, because this is a messy one. Why don't Birmingham Council offer to do a local referendum to increase council tax by 20% to pay all council workers more to end the bin strike? Probably because they would vote no. And I think because they would vote no. And actually 20% would put a lot of people in poverty. 5% is iffy enough for some people. And then if they vote no, they're still stuck with this situation that the court is, looking at its watch and going, when are you going to sort this out? But anyway, sorry, we have run completely over. I've got to get ready for the next stream, which will be on Politics Social at 1 o'clock. But thanks for coming on, everyone. Have an enjoyable lunch and the rest of day and a good weekend. I'll be back on with the stream tomorrow evening. Until next time, I'll see you later.